In 1970, Venezuela was the richest country in Latin America. Richer than Brazil, richer than Chile, richer than Argentina. Its capital, Caracas, was called the Paris of South America. People flew in from Miami. They had more proven oil reserves than Saudi Arabia. More than Saudi Arabia. Today, over 7 million Venezuelans have fled the country. Doctors are paid the equivalent of $3 a month. $3. And here's the part that should make you uncomfortable. It didn't happen overnight. It never does. What kills a rich country isn't disaster, it's slow decisions. This video isn't just about Venezuela, it's about a pattern that has repeated in Africa, in Asia, in the Middle East, in South America, across centuries and across very different governments. And here's why you should care. Because the same forces that hollowed out these countries, bad incentives, political capture, resource dependency, debt spirals, these forces don't need a dictatorship to work. They just need people to stop paying attention. So let's pay attention. 5 countries, 5 traps, 1 uncomfortable pattern. Let's start with the most dramatic case because it teaches everything. Venezuela didn't fail because it had no resources. It failed because it had too many. Economists have a name for this. They call it the resource curse. Here's how it works in plain language. Imagine you win the lottery. Tomorrow, you don't need to work. So you quit your job. You stop building skills. You start spending fast. Now imagine that lottery money starts running out, but you've already forgotten how to work. That's what oil did to Venezuela on a national scale. Construction cranes, new universities, modern Venezuelan hospitals. In the 1970s, oil prices exploded globally. Venezuela was sitting on a gold mine. The government, democratically elected, not a dictatorship, important to note, started spending lavishly. Subsidies on everything. Cheap gas, cheap food, cheap electricity. It felt like generosity, but it was actually dependency in disguise. Cheap today, expensive forever. The economy became a one-trick pony. Oil was 90% of export earnings. So when oil prices dropped in the 1980s, the whole system cracked. Then came Hugo Chavez in 1999, charismatic, popular, and convinced that the solution to falling oil revenue was to print money and nationalize industries. Foreign companies were kicked out. Farms were seized. The currency was controlled. By 2018, inflation in Venezuela hit 65,000%. Not a typo, 65,000%. A cup of coffee that cost 1 bolivar in January cost 650 bolivars by December. People were paying for groceries by weight, literally weighing stacks of cash because counting it took too long. The lesson isn't oil is bad. Norway has oil. Qatar has oil. They're doing just fine. The lesson is this. When a country's wealth comes from the ground instead of from its people, the government stops needing to serve its citizens. It only needs to control the tap. Power follows money, always. Zimbabwe, when printing money becomes a sport. A Zimbabwean $100 trillion note. Hold for 4 full seconds. Let it breathe. That is a $100 trillion bill. 100 trillion. It was printed by the Zimbabwean government in 2009. You couldn't buy a loaf of bread with it. Here's what most people don't know about Zimbabwe. In the 1960s, it was called the breadbasket of Africa. It exported food to the entire continent. Its agricultural system was one of the most productive in the world. So how do you go from breadbasket to $100 trillion toilet paper? 2 words: land reform. Robert Mugabe speeches. In the late 1990s, President Mugabe began seizing white-owned farms and redistributing them. The political argument had merit. Land ownership was deeply unequal, a legacy of colonialism, but the execution was catastrophic. Experienced farmers were replaced overnight with people who had no farming experience. Crops failed. Exports collapsed. The government's response? Print money to cover the budget gap. More money, same amount of goods. That's the definition of inflation. When you flood a system with cash but don't produce more stuff, each note becomes worth less, and then worth even less. Zimbabwe's central bank kept adding zeros to the notes, hoping it would solve the problem. It's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline and then being surprised when the fire gets bigger. You cannot print your way to prosperity. By 2009, inflation was estimated at 89.7 sextillion% per month. That number is so large it barely makes sense in English. People were paid twice a day because by lunchtime, their morning wages had already lost value. Zimbabwe eventually abandoned its own currency entirely. They started using US dollars and South African rand. The lesson here is both simple and terrifying. Trust is the real currency of any economy. The moment citizens stop believing their money means something, really stop believing it, the money stops working. Argentina, the country that keeps forgetting the lesson. Some countries fall into a trap once. Argentina has fallen into it 9 times. 9 sovereign debt defaults, the most of any country in history. In 1913, Argentina was one of the 10 richest countries in the world. Per capita income was on par with France and Germany. Buenos Aires had more bookshops per capita than almost any city on earth. Millions of European immigrants came, not to America, but to Argentina, chasing opportunity. And then, spending became politically irresistible. Here's the pattern Argentina repeats, almost mechanically. A new government comes in. It spends heavily on social programs, borrows money internationally to fund them. The economy grows, briefly. Then debt becomes unmanageable. The peso crashes. The government freezes bank accounts. This actually happened in 2001. People lined up at ATMs and were told no, and eventually they default. The next government promises it will be different. It isn't. 2001 financial crisis. Protesters in Buenos Aires, bank queues, politicians fleeing in helicopters. In 2001, Argentina experienced one of the largest sovereign defaults in history, $100 billion. People lost their savings overnight. Middle-class families who had spent decades building wealth woke up to find their dollars forcibly converted to pesos at a rate that wiped out half their value. And then the peso collapsed further, so the other half evaporated too. There's a dark joke in Argentina. We are optimists. We have to be. Pessimists can't afford the therapy. Argentina's story is really a story about political short-termism. When the cost of spending is paid by the next government, every government spends. And the people who always pay the real price are the ones who saved, the responsible ones, every time. The Democratic Republic of Congo may be the richest country on earth. By some estimates, its untapped mineral wealth exceeds $24 trillion. Cobalt, diamonds, gold, coltan, the mineral inside your phone and laptop. Every device in this room likely has a piece of the Congo in it. And yet, schools with no roofs, unpaved roads, villages without electricity. The DRC ranks near the bottom of virtually every human development index on Earth. Average life expectancy, 60 years. Over 70% of the population lives on less than $2.15 a day. How do you have $24 trillion underground, and people dying of preventable diseases above it? The answer is a concept called extraction without development. Having wealth and keeping wealth are 2 completely different skills. Colonial powers, Belgium primarily, did not build the Congo. They mined it. Roads were built toward ports, not between cities. Infrastructure served extraction, not people. When independence came in 1960, the DRC inherited a country with almost no educated civil servants, no functioning institutions, and neighbors circling its resources. Then came decades of civil war, often funded by the very minerals beneath the soil. Rebel groups didn't fight because they hated each other. They fought because whoever controlled the mines controlled the money. The minerals that should have been the Congo's greatest asset became the fuel for its longest conflict. This is the resource curse at its most brutal. And the uncomfortable truth? Much of the demand for those minerals comes from wealthy nations buying the electronics, jewelry, and electric vehicles that Congolese children will never afford. Let's bring this closer to home. Greece, European country, EU member, democracy. In 2010, Greece nearly collapsed. And unlike Venezuela or Zimbabwe, this wasn't a story about oil or printing money. This was a story about a lie sustained so long. It became policy. When Greece joined the Eurozone in 2001, it reported economic statistics that, as it turned out, were significantly manipulated. The deficit was understated. Debt was hidden using complex financial instruments. Why? Because EU membership required certain benchmarks. And Greece wanted in. Once inside, borrowing became cheap. Greece borrowed as if it were Germany, with German interest rates, but spent as if the bill would never come. Government jobs multiplied. Pensions were generous. Retirement ages were low. By 2010, Greece owed more than its entire GDP, and the lenders, European banks mostly, had started demanding repayment. Greece couldn't pay. Borrowed credibility is still borrowed. The bailout that followed came with conditions: austerity, deep cuts, pension reductions, tax hikes. Unemployment hit 27%. Youth unemployment hit 58%. A country that had been planning beach holidays was now lining up for food banks. The tragedy of Greece is not that it was poor, it's that it borrowed to look rich. And when the illusion ended, real people paid for a fiction their politicians created. 5 countries, 5 different stories, different governments, different continents, different resources, and yet the same pattern keeps appearing. Wealth concentrated at the top, institutions too weak to stop the pillaging, citizens too distracted or too afraid to demand accountability, and a slow, quiet erosion that feels, from the inside, like nothing at all, until it's everything. Collapse is not an event. It's a process you barely notice until you can't ignore it. Here's the uncomfortable truth this video has been building toward. None of these countries thought it would happen to them. Venezuela's middle class in 1975 would have laughed if you told them that in 40 years their currency would be weighed, not counted. Zimbabweans in 1980 celebrated independence with genuine hope. Argentinians in 1913 expected to be a G7 nation within a generation. The warning is not that poor countries stay poor. The warning is that rich countries can become poor, and the mechanism is almost always the same. Power captures wealth, institutions weaken, the feedback loops that would normally self-correct, elections, a free press, an independent judiciary, get quietly disabled. And by the time people realize what's happening, the tools to fix it are already broken. The economists who study these collapses often say the same thing. They say the countries that avoided this fate weren't lucky. They were vigilant. They built institutions that outlasted any one leader. They protected the rule of law even when it was inconvenient. They asked hard questions about where the money was going and demanded real answers. Those aren't heroic acts. They're habits, civic habits, the kind that feel unnecessary when things are going well, and absolutely essential when they're not. So the next time someone tells you that wealth is permanent, that success is guaranteed, that it can't happen here. Remember Caracas in 1970. Remember Buenos Aires in 1913. Remember that every country that fell once believed it was the exception. The most dangerous economic belief this time is different. You've just learned more economic history in 20 minutes than most people learn in a year. The question is what you do with it. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and maybe start paying attention to the slow things.